Hello, everyone. Welcome. You are listening and watching simultaneously Rashkin Report Perspectives and also Silicon Curtain because here is Jonathan Fink and Yuri Rashkin. Hey, Jonathan. Wow, you are,
Uh,
geez, welcome. I'm so excited to
it's
see
good
you
to
because
be
you're in the
here.
States. Where are
Not
you?
just not just on Thanksgiving, but here I are in Kiev. Kiev. I'm practicing my pronunciation there with the drawn out. But yeah, Kiev.
Yeah, so the spelling isn't the only thing that changed now that the pronunciation changed as well.
We have to fall in line with the local version, exactly.
It's just
Which
it's
is a
just
challenge for Anglo. It should be easy for you. You've got the Lenin and Kiev. It should be a breeze.
I know it's one of my specialties is to say letter E. Yeah, because it's you have to just kind of extend your jaw a certain way. But if you were born that way, then you're just Lady Gaga or from Russia. Okay, my goodness. So, Jonathan, I wanted to check in with you to talk about this one big scandal that is like blowing up, but it's weirdly blowing up because the Witkoff gate, Witkoff affair, the Plyonki Witkoff, all of that is blowing up in Russian differently than in English. I feel like it lands in English a little bit of a thud because Trump is saying kind of like, well, this is business as usual. And there's, again, no nurses or police officers that are going to come in and arrest anybody and or retreat or anybody. So it's kind of like what is going on? And yet in Russian, in Ukrainian, I presume it is a huge deal. How? What are your thoughts?
I think it is a huge deal, except that I think Ukrainians hope or believe that their leadership is not going to fall into a Russian psychological operation and give everything away. I think some people understand that this is a game that needs to be played. And ultimately, there's several things I think they take as read. Zelensky has to play the game. He can't turn around and say to Trump, well, no, we're not going to do any of this. I think they know, or at least they believe, because at the moment there's no facts here, this is all supposition. They believe that Zelensky has to play the game with Trump. But they also believe that Putin doesn't want peace. Putin cannot make peace, especially when we get into 28 points or 19 points or whatever. Putin is almost certainly not even going to be able to agree the harshest possible settlement, which is the original 28 points. He'd want to add to it and add to it and add to it. But actually, the version that Russia's going to be presented with is going to be, I won't even call it the watered down version, it's the version that moves, nudges towards something that's vaguely recognizable as justice, not security. We'll come on to that. But of course, Putin's not going to set that. If the 28 points with all the addendums he was going to add to it was barely acceptable, then anything that in his eyes not just waters it down, but turns it into a humiliation for Russia is not going to fly. I think most Ukrainians are just like, the bombs fell, the bombs are falling, and the bombs will fall. This is not going to change. So they're just cracking on as normal, building drones, investing in tech, living their lives, carrying on, protecting themselves as much as they can. I don't think anyone here believes this is going to end. So maybe this peace stuff isn't such a big deal here as it is to the West. I think we're getting ourselves in a complete kerfuffle about it. That may, I'll bounce this back to you, that may be part of the psychological operation, part of the cognitive warfare that this, I think, forms part of.
Well, I think that there is. It's hard to even, there's an angle to everything. And psychological warfare is a big term, but I think that that what you're describing when it comes to behavior of Ukrainians who are just kind of going on with their life as if this is an ongoing problem that's not necessarily magically going to end tomorrow. No matter how many times I get asked, by Ukrainian journalists saying, "Is this war going to end by the end of the year?" No. Um,
No, no.
but last week I went to see Timothy Snyder and Rachel Maddow here in Chicago, And it was really awesome because they're relaunching the MSNBC channel is MS Now, and so they have a couple of events. And so in the one in Chicago, I was close. We went to see it. It was awesome. And it was interesting to observe Timothy Snyder in terms of his approach to what the audience, where they were at. Because as he said, he kind of examines the situation and then offers his observations and notes that he feels are needed, which is great because he pays attention. But people were like in a state of panic, near panic. People were asking question, at what point should I consider leaving the United States? Because things they're so terrified of what's going on. And Timothy Snyder says, well, basically what you said, be like Ukraine. You have to just look what they're doing there. They're just going on with their day and they're doing things that they need to be doing. And so kind of don't panic. And I think that's an important part of this.
Don't panic, but don't be afraid. Terrible things, this is going to sound bad, terrible things are guaranteed to happen. Terrible things will happen. But don't be afraid, because being afraid of them is part of the cognitive warfare. It's part of forcing you to surrender in advance. This is another phrase that Timothy Snyder uses. Don't obey in advance, don't surrender in advance. What we're seeing in this, all these discussions around the peace plan, and this is some people are going to be upset by this. Anyone who is amplifying the so-called peace plan debate, anyone who is arguing the nuances of it, and that includes most of the media, most analysts, and most politicians, my view is they are all feeding into a Russian psychological operation, a piece of cognitive
I don't
warfare.
know, because I can't help it, because that's what people are asking me about, and then I have to say, but at least I try to say.
I'm not pointing the finger at you necessarily, but I mean those who are taking the proposals as if they're real, those who are taking the proposals as if Russia is serious about those and is entering into a serious negotiating stance, that is when they're falling into the operation. I think what you're doing is pointing out that actually, based on Putin's psychology, history, pattern of behaviors, this is not going to fly. That, I think, is skirting around the edges of the operation. But most of the media are not doing that. They're talking about this as if peace is around the corner and that this is a genuine process and that Putin is going to negotiate in a Western style. None of this is going to happen. In fact, we're in Kyiv. We're expecting, it's been quiet last night, it's quiet the night before. So the 2 nights I've been here is been extraordinarily quiet. It was pretty noisy the night before I arrived, but it's Thanksgiving. Putin's psychology is whenever he's seen to give concessions, or whenever he feels that he can humiliate his adversaries, or when he feels that his adversaries are weak, he always lashes out. So my expectation is that the bad things are coming this way. And part of the reason bad things are coming this way is because so many commentators in the West are talking about peace and Russia's stance on peace as if it's real. And yet it's not. It's a psychological game. It's part of the warfare that they may think ultimately will result in something, but what they want it to result in is a maximalist victory, including all of the 28 points, plus a bunch of points they haven't even probably dreamed up yet. All of this is part of an operation to psych us up, to weaken us to the point where we're ready to give in, to the point where we're desperate, running around like headless chickens, as you've described. That's the state of fear they want to put us into, because when you're fearful, you're not thinking rationally, and you're not prepared to push back and stand your ground. So again, this is why I call it psychological warfare.
I agree, but I would still say that I feel, the main thing that I do try to convey in my interviews is that, in my opinion, this is all a delay tactic.
Yeah, I mean, of course. I mean,
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Delay the weapons, stop the sanctions, delay the seizure of seized assets, delay any punitive measure that might force them to end aggression.
And yet today is Thanksgiving, which, as we know, is the day that the war should have ended, because, Zelensky was going to sign it today today is a historic day. Another loss, it's another loss for people who are trying to push Ukraine into a corner.
Yeah. And I think the optics of Zelensky turning around and going like, right, we want no part of this. Prior to this, Thanksgiving holiday, prior to that, the optics of that would have been terrible. You can just imagine. I mean, they're pushing ahead with the awfulness anyway, but at least there aren't fingers pointing at Ukraine as being the blocker. At this point, Ukraine is like, there's all these proposals, they're horrible and disingenuous, but it's Europe that is questioning it. Ukraine is just following the flow, as it were. I think Zelensky knows that at some point this process is going to fall apart like all the rest. And he sees as what you said there is that this is a process to suspend the harsher implementation of sanctions. I expect that might not work, actually, because there's some odd stuff going on behind the scenes that suggests that maybe there's a momentum behind the sanctions process. But what it could do is potentially delay Europe in seizing the central bank assets. It could delay certain other efforts in challenging the grey fleet. It could delay further oil sanctions implementations. Now, why is Putin doing all this? Because this stuff's starting to work. But as I pointed out in an episode yesterday, which didn't do too well, just pointing out to the audience, I thought it was a great title, didn't do too well, don't know what's wrong there. But I called it 36% and $36 a barrel, because these are the two figures that help to explain all of this pressure. Why now? Why now? And that's because Putin is on the ropes with the economy, and he probably realizes there are certain issues, not that he cares about his people or objectively about those economic issues, but he cares because they limit his ability to project aggression and to build his army. So he's concerned there that his strength maybe economically is weakening. And of course, the poll number, the lowest poll number that Trump received is 36%. They are both approaching this from a position of relative weakness, and yet they want to create the impression of strength and project weakness instead onto Ukraine, position Ukraine as the weaker party. I don't think Ukraine is nearly as weak as they think.
Yes, and today is another proof of that. Just literally because they should have been agreeing to victory.
Well,
this is a capitulation day. It didn't.
It is capitulation day. Where's the surrender? Where's the shields being handed over?
Right.
No, I mean that's never going to happen. Never going to happen. And they haven't taken Pokrovsk. Let's face it. All the media were frothing at the mouth last week. Pokrovsk is about to fall. What a disaster! No, Pokrovsk was held for 21 months. It's bled Russia white, and it still hasn't fallen. It still has not fallen. Now, I'm sure there are things that could have been done better there, but this is a catastrophe for Russia. It's a catastrophe in terms of a campaign, and it's still ongoing, bleeding their troops out. And yet you don't read that. You don't read that in the media. It's always positioned as it's going to fall, it's going to be a strategic disaster, it's a nexus for this, that, and the other. It's been besieged for 21 months. Do they seriously think that it's still a supply nexus for Ukraine? Do the media seriously think that there's still massive amounts of logistics going through a besieged city? No, they were cauterized, all of these connections many months ago. It would be a terrible loss if and when it goes, but it has helped to bleed out the Russian economy, bleed out the sovereign wealth fund, bleed out their human resources. In that sense, it's a resounding success for Ukraine. Not a sign of weakness at all.
Absolutely. I think it's another failed capitulation attempt. The other thing that I was curious about to get your take on is there's a video that's blowing up in Russian language space, perhaps more so, maybe it should be in both, but again, Garry Kasparov.
I've seen that. Lovely, yeah.
Right. And I was wondering because honestly, I feel like while I respect Garry endlessly, I feel like his emotional approach is not as, it looks great, but I wonder how effective it is. I don't know.
I'll dissent slightly from that, but maybe for the same reasons as you've got here. But throughout these years, I go to many events where they're Ukrainians, and they're accused of being emotional. They're accused of being too close to the problem. They're accused of being this, that, and the other.
Here I am going through the same, exactly same, yes. Tropes.
And yet, Ukrainians are some of the most emotional in a human sense, but some of the most analytical and, I won't say detached, but able to think philosophically and strategically about what they're saying. What they're presenting, and in many of these events, what they're presenting to the Western audience is the reality as they see it. And that reality is so much more in focus. It's not the blurred, fuzzy image, unfortunately, that most of us have of what the threat, or most in the West have of the threat. They have a clear, unimpeded image of what Russian imperialism is like and what it's like to be attacked by Russia, what it's like to be occupied by Russia. They know, and they're explaining a reality. They're also extrapolating for that strategic conclusions, that if we don't stop Russia, this is what they're going to do. And I've been in so many audiences where that message is just too strong, it's too harsh, even though they're not actually using emotional language. It's almost like organ rejection. You know, it just, many Western minds cannot face it. I think what Gary's doing here is trying to break through in a different way.
In part because our life here is so good that it's hard for us to imagine how things can be so bad for so long that people would really feel like this is an appropriate way to speak about somebody. And yet, you know, like, but if you look at how Americans are speaking and feeling about Trump now versus 10 years ago, there's a progression or regression or whatever. So it's just that those steps that the Westerners did not go through, and I wish we never have to. This, I feel like Zelensky. I feel like you should never experience this. Trump goes, no, don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're going to feel great. It's going to be great.
Yeah, it's going to be lovely.
Okay. Yeah, so I hope we never experience this here. But again, kudos to you for being in Kiev these days. Wow.
There's lots of stuff going on. You know, it's good to be here to make connections as I have for future interviews. But I always come with a very specific purpose in mind. This time I'm helping a friend and colleague of mine to research a film he wants to make about the drone warfare. And again, I think this is absolutely pertinent. We met today. I won't say the name because it's, you know, I don't have permission to use their name. But I met someone who's a visionary on the drone warfare who was describing what it would be like years before it actually happened. And you know, she will say that there were very few in Ukraine who were receptive to it. You know, even around 2014, 15, prior to the drone war that we see in the full scale. And it was only a couple of years into the full scale that really, you know, this ecosystem of drones really got going. She was describing that ecosystem and its impact and the societal mobilization you need, not just to win, but to just counteract the aggression that's coming down the tracks. She predicted it all, was ignored, and has carried on doing it. But everything she said pretty much has come to pass. This is the point now where I think Gary is correct. Being polite, talking in the diplomatic, reserved language of Western think tanks, of NATO and all the others, none of this has worked. If you describe a reality that they're instinctively going to reject or feel doesn't relate to them, it really doesn't help anymore to use the language also that allows them to dismiss it.
But the language
almost you have to scream in their faces already, you know.
Yes,
but Ukrainians can't do that. Gary maybe can.
It's a language of accusations. It's a language that puts people on defensive. It makes them justify themselves instead of just wanting to help. And I feel like it's just, I don't know that, I feel like there's a more effective way of delivering the message for the audiences so they can hear it. But at the same time,
well, Yuri, how many years of that other approach? And where are we? We're still asleep. We haven't taken the frozen assets.
We are waking up.
We're not prepared.
No, I think part of my big point is that the world is kind of the way it is, and we have to function in it. And to some extent, the West is never going to wake up like we want it to, and that's, you know. But we have to do what we can to
it will
get a
wake
response.
Up. My colleague here uses the example of Jaws. Like there's the scientist, if people remember Jaws, who's like telling everybody there's this big ass, you know, shark's going to come along, and he's trying to tell people how to prepare for it, and no one wants to listen. And he comes out with the line, well, no one's going to do anything until it comes up and bites you on the arse. Well, the West will do something about it, but it'll only do it when The drones are dropping on cities when missiles are
But
dropping on
that's not
cities.
Gary dropping on the cities. That's drones dropping on the city.
Yes, it is. I think he would feel that at this point he's been remiss unless he tried to, force that thing. Because ideally, if we prepare for this ahead of time, we can prevent some of the destruction, some of the misery, some of the death, and actually the scale of reaction we're going to have to come up with when it does happen. We are, in some ways, more asleep than we were in the 1930s. Even, dare I say it, little Neville Chamberlain, after he realized that, he didn't realize the full direction, because I don't think he could imagine where we were going. It's kind of very difficult to imagine at that point the full, depravity of the Second World War. But he did kickstart Britain's defense industries, even while he was engaged in the appeasing peace processes. Well, I'm afraid to say we've got far, far clearer signals over the last few years. Putin has been telling us what he's going to do since 2007 and demonstrating it with some regularity. And it still hasn't quite landed. Now, I'm told that Western politicians are waking up to the threat of what Russia represents, but it isn't translating into the actions that are required to deal with that threat. So there's the disconnect
because there. The Biden ask has not occurred yet.
Yes, their ices are peachy and wholesome.
and just waiting. Anyway, but it's interesting to me because Thomas Friedman, I think, in his recent article, wrote that Donald Trump is going to get Neville Chamberlain Award, not the Nobel Prize, but the Chamberlain Prize. Yes. And listening to you reminded to me how inaccurate that statement is, because Chamberlain at least tried. He was hoping. He was an idealist, perhaps, because this administration is just selling Ukraine.
Literally selling.
Yeah, Chamberlain wasn't trying to sell Czechoslovakia. He wasn't trying to sell another country, was he?
No, our role in Czechoslovakia and handing it over to the Nazis was grotesquely shameful.
But he was actually hoping for a peace. I don't know that Trump even cared.
No, he was hoping for peace, yes, and he wasn't in it for personal profit. So there was definitely coming from a position of values. He was coming from a deep sense of humanity, absolutely, because the memory of what the First World War had been like is etched.
Well, when you say humanity, then our president is disqualified.
Yeah, they're coming from a different place. I think he doesn't deserve the Chamberlain Prize because, as you say, it's far more shameful what he's doing. It's so venal, corrupt, so lacking in humanity. I think he doesn't deserve the Chamberlain Prize. Something, maybe the Chamber Pot Prize. That's the one beneath it.
Yes, the Chamber Pot Prize versus the Chamberlain. Chamberlain.
It's getting worse, though. I just literally logged on, and this will be my episode tonight. It seems that Rubio's had another fantastic brainwave, or brain fire, however you want to position it. I don't know where it's come from because this is still just breaking. They now seem to be proposing a peace treaty, an adapted set of peace conditions, but the security part of it is suspended based on accepting the so-called peace part. Well, hang on a second. The only point of having a peace treaty is to have a viable security. Otherwise, really? What exactly is going to stop Russia from literally attacking 5 minutes after the fortifications in Donbass are handed over? Yes. And by the way, that won't happen because I don't know this for sure, but if you're local military commanders and you've fought for 21 months over Pokrovsk and it hasn't fallen in all that time, are you going to hand over the territory behind it with the 3 layers of defensive fortifications and the trenches and the ditches and the dragon's teeth? Are you going to hand all that over so the Russian army is now facing open fields with no barriers and no? Are you going to do that? No, local commanders will not do that. Then you have a revolt. You have a revolution. Simple as that.
I gotta actually. The story broke a few like last night before I went to sleep, so I managed to put out a video about it in Russian. It's doing quite well, but I think this is a real slap on the face to people who had hopes for Marco Rubio. They were like, "Oh, he's an adult. Oh, he'll behave reasonably." Listen to this. Hold my beer, said Marco Rubio, and said, "Oh, by the way, no guarantees." That's it.
I mean, I have to say, who was expecting adult behavior from him? Now he's already shown he's not as bad as Vance in terms of doing a 360, because we remember Vance once said that Trump was America's Hitler. Well, he seems perfectly happy to fulfill the role of, think of your favorite Nazi and which role he's modeling himself on. Yes, we thought Rubio was not quite at that level, but he clearly has no spine at all. It is Kellogg I'm disappointed with, because it's quite clear that Kellogg has some understanding of the situation, and faced with huge pressure, fine, he leaves the team. I get that. He's forced out. He has no effect anymore, or he's come to realize how little effect he possibly had throughout. But that's the point where you speak out. That's the point where you take a brave stance and say, right, I've seen it from the inside. This is what it's like. Has he done that yet? I don't see any sign of that.
Wait, first of all, I would like to know if you have any information. Is Kellogg stepping down? Is this his desire, or is he being pushed out? And second of all, I think that he will do what you say. Well, maybe you're closer to the source. But then the part that I think is important about the speaking out, I suspect he probably will do that once he's retired. That seems to be the style.
And it's at that point, it's entirely ineffective. Why? Because Trump will be able to essentially slag them off and degrade their authority, certainly in the mind of sort of MAGA adherents. And then whatever they come out with can then be labeled conveniently as, he was a secret Democrat, and he was a rhino, and he was this, and he was that. It's a highly ineffective pattern.
It is effective in this sense. And I heard it from Ben Hodges most clearly. Retirees give people who are active members of the institution some cover. And we see how much administration is concerned about it right now, because FBI is starting investigation of the senators and congressmen who spoke out and recorded a video saying that American military should not engage in, follow illegal orders. Duh, like wash your hands before eating.
It's in the Army's constitution. They've basically read out the constitution, or an equivalent version in the military, and they're going to be arrested for it. It's 1984. It's Orwellian, and I'm afraid anyone who is at this point saying anything positive about this administration is complicit in building an Orwellian dictatorship.
So no news on Kellogg, huh?
No, I mean, his daughter, maybe stuff will leak out via his daughter, who is involved in Ukraine, is perhaps based in Ukraine, I heard. So it'll be interesting to watch her as well as him and see what leaks out. But I suspect, he'll follow the pattern. He'll wait until he's got a nice, chunky book deal, and it will come out months after it would actually have been effective politically.
Absolutely. What about Driscoll? Are you hearing anything about that character besides the fact that he's the best friend of Vance and an investment banker with no diplomatic experience?
No, he's the military guy, isn't he? So he has got some supposed military experience. Is that right?
So that is also, he's not, I believe he earned second lieutenant or something pretty.
So he's not actually super senior. Now, his role is becoming more and more murky, or more and more something we should study. Again today with the Rubio's sort of, peace before security, peace inverted commas, the other story that seems to be breaking is that Driscoll has been going around actually threatening Ukraine and threatening Europe. So again, this is reported indirectly. We wonder whether it's a leak or not. I'm still trying to find out. But supposedly he's gone to the Ukrainians and said, you won't get any better peace than this. All you'll get is immense suffering heaped on suffering, and then we won't have any skin in the game. You won't be getting weapons from us. We'll wash our hands of the whole thing. So that's the threat presented to Ukraine. But he's also been going to Europe to say, this is moving out of control. This whole thing is moving out of control. and we don't think we'll be able to step in and save you. And Russian missiles are getting longer range and more effective, and they're getting a bigger arsenal. They're going to be dropping on your cities, and frankly, we won't be able to stop it. So that apparently is what he's been saying to the Europeans. So this seems to me, we started with cognitive warfare. It seems to me that the US team is, whether it's consciously done or not, are conducting cognitive warfare operations against Ukraine and Europe on behalf of Russia, whether they realize it or not. And Driscoll seems to be a key part of this.
That is very, very interesting, and important to know. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't liked this stream right now, you're getting really great information right now. And that makes me think, Jonathan, that why not go with what I heard from Malcolm Nance. I did a stream with Lev Parnas a few days ago, and he had an amazing panel. And Malcolm Nance suggested that maybe Zelensky should talk about pooling that $50 billion or that whatever that Europe is planning on spending in United States and spending it in Europe. If we're going that route, then maybe Ukraine needs to find a way to hit back on a way that makes sense with this president. This president might listen to.
If we were waking up in that sense, we would move forward. I don't think Belgium, and the fingers often pointed at Belgium as being the impediment, and then Slovakia and Hungary getting in the way. If we were really serious about defending ourselves as well as Ukraine, we would, and I think the process is actually happening at the moment, to suspend the voting rights of Hungary so it can't block these things. Europe would then come up with some form of insurance to indemnify Belgium so that if it was sued, collectively, the full liability of that doesn't fall on Belgium. We would be taking measures, if we were serious, and this is collectively all of Europe, to do that. Now, Britain is slightly outside of that now, but we hold apparently £25 billion worth of those central bank assets. If we were really serious, we would hand those over unilaterally to set the pace. We're not doing any of that. We're still wringing our hands in many
don't
ways.
hand it over. Just invest it in armaments.
That's been done. So the interest is being invested, but the financial gap.
But the 25 billion, you said?
Yeah, so the interest is already kind of being provided. Obviously, it often comes slowly. Yeah, the interest on it. But no, Ukraine needs the entire amount structured over a couple of years to fill its budget gap, to help pay first responders and so on. And then that can be used in joint military manufacturing projects. Ukraine has military capacity to build things that it needs right now. And I don't know the percentage offhand, but it's well below capacity. That money could immediately be used to tool up based on existing production, not even blue sky kind of stuff. So that could all happen very, very quickly if there was the will and determination there. And the US position...
Is it likely that this will happen more quickly if it is urgent? Like maybe they're, because we see with American politicians, nothing happens until it's urgent, and then it happens.
And this is where maybe Putin is making a bit of a problem well, we'll come to this in a second. I think partly this may not even have been fully Putin's initiative. He may be outsourcing or experimenting with foreign policy just to see what comes of it. And he may not have a specific outcome in mind, apart from, there's cognitive warfare, there's the deterring allied assistance, etc. But he may be almost taking an entrepreneurial kind of approach to this, like, let's see what falls out, if we push. I completely lost the train of my thought there. I don't know what I was going to say. No, I think there's a lot of stuff we could be doing there. We could threaten.
You're covering up the microphone.
Oh, sorry. We could threaten not to buy all sorts of U.S. armaments. We could persuade Ukraine to tear up the minerals deal. Right? No security, no minerals. Sorry, shove your minerals up your fundament. Frankly, not that the minerals deal really was ever going to guarantee anything, but it's just a little sliver of leverage that is there. And maybe not even tear it up, just say, well, this is suspended pending security. Well, why are we going to invest in infrastructure and mines when there's nothing there to protect them from being destroyed? So I think there's a lot that could be done. I'm guessing no one wants to make a move before Thanksgiving because no one wants to give Trump a whole bunch of narratives that he can, tweet out over the holiday. They're waiting for that to pass.
Well, then this is going to be another exciting week because in the United States it seems like things should calm down, but we know he's going to find something to tweet about. He's gonna talk about something, and congratulations to you for going out of your way to deliver content and just getting to the bottom of the story. I find that there is as much interest right now in Ukraine about what's going on as ever. And I am pumping out content on 2 channels right now. And please follow me on Substack, Rashkin Report. That's my English communication channel mostly, and a little bit of YouTube. But there is interest from people, which gives me hope. Because I think if this was truly just total thud and nothing mattered, then there wouldn't be so much interest. I think this shows kind of a disconnect between like the official leaders and actually what public wants and public cares about. And public cares about Ukraine, public cares about the Russian threat, not the podcast so much, but the Russian threat itself. And I think that we just, give public what they want and what we need.
But I think your content and what we're doing here is even more important because we're not saying this is the reality, but we're questioning the sort of standard narratives that you hear in the media, the ones which have a very Western framework placed over things, which, let's face it, is the majority of content. It's recycling endlessly voices, many of whom don't know what they're talking about. And I'll give a good example here. On the BBC's flagship news analysis program, which used to mostly be rather good and incisive, but all the journalists have now left to do podcasts because they were forced out. Guess who they got on as an expert analyst on Russian behavior and psychology and geopolitics?
Ushakov?
Piers effing Morgan. Piers Morgan. He knows shit from shit. Sorry for the language. I mean, he's not totally in Trump's back pocket or Putin's back pocket, but he knows sweet FA about how Kremlin politics and geopolitics works. To be clear, he knows nothing, and his so-called insights were really worth toilet paper.
What is the purpose of that, do you think?
It's a form of obeying in advance. It's a form of dumbing down. It's a surrender in the United Kingdom, I think, to right-wing forces. We see, for instance, I don't want to get sort of sidelined in that, but we see a guy called Richard Tice, who is one of the Reform MPs, who's one of Farage's set. They've only got 5 MPs, and yet he seems to be all over BBC media streams, snippets, clips, shorts, all over, blown way out of proportion compared to their actual representation in the parliament. And there seems to be a surrender in advance to the impending right-wing storm, let's say, the oncoming storm.
When is the storm expected?
Well, if certain journalists do their jobs, and I know there are a few fabulous people who are on the trail here, they will find out enough dirt on reform to stop it in its tracks. I think that is the best hope. Now, of course, we know in the US, all the facts, all the reporting did not help prevent Trump twice, nor all the criminal cases, etc. But I think there is still a modicum of checks and balances. So we saw that in the wake of Epstein, and just based on, actually preemptively, I think, we saw the UK representative for the US, Peter Mandelson, be removed, because a hint of association with Epstein, and we saw Prince Andrew stripped of his status and titles because of his association. So it seems there is not absolute impunity for corruption and graft yet in the UK. That gives me hope. One of
Well, that
Farage's
seems like more of a compliment to your, monarch there than anything. Sorry to say.
well, there's that, but he would have only done that if he felt there was pressure mounting from various other quarters. But it does show a certain sense of let's say responsibility before the public and before certain standards. But to put it on a legal framing, one of Nigel Farage's key deputies in various political structures he's ruled over the last couple of years, and who's one of his fellow MPs in the European Parliament, has just been convicted for 10.5 years for accepting bribes to expound Russian narratives in the European Parliament. 10.5 years. So we still have some level of standard, and I'm hoping that when or if similar information comes out about Farage's graft, then he would not be immune or above the law. That's part of the fight back to return, I would say, to robust, more sort of liberal consensus-based values. But there's a lot to rebuild.
Just looking at the BBC situation and this acquiescence in advance, what is the date that they're looking at as a possible advance of the real time when they would need to be expected to be obeying instead of doing it in advance? Is there an election that they're looking forward to? Or?
4 years' time is an election would have to be called.
They're obeying 4 years in advance?
Yeah. Based on polling that suggests or hints that he might be close to a majority. This is why it's terrifying. This is why it's terrifying. It's obeying in advance based on an expectation from polling data. It's extraordinary, quite extraordinary, frankly. And the leader of the middle party, who has dozens of MPs, barely gets a look in.
Is it because they're afraid of a lawsuit from Trump for $5 billion?
No, I don't think that will go through because it's outside the statute of limitations. I'm told that that's just frivolous nonsense. No, I think they're far more worried about...
That sounds like our president.
Yeah, frivolous nonsense. There we go, with no hope of coming to pass. No, I think they're far more afraid of either a complete either reduction or a complete abandonment of the funding model that makes the BBC possible, which is essentially a tax on UK citizens. That is part of a core right-wing agenda. It has to be said, though, there are quite a few people who more traditional conservatives who don't necessarily go along with that and don't necessarily see it in the national interest to destroy the BBC. But there are some on the more sort of radical right agenda, and those who are quite clearly, many of whom are aligning themselves with Trumpian politics, who would love to smash the BBC. Ironically, of course, some of them have, it turns out, shares in private media companies, including GB News, which is the British version of Fox, or KGB News, as I like to call it.
I shared that term with the Ukrainian journalist. They thought it was hilarious because they were quoting GB News. I was like, there's just letter K according to Jonathan Fink that's missing. That's great. No, I think that we shouldn't obey in advance, and I think that it's amazing what... on one hand, people go, we don't live in this kind of a horror, don't tell us about it, don't scare us. But on the other hand, it's remarkable how quickly and easily people get scared.
It absolutely is. And, we're going to go into this thing in more detail in future conversations. So the person I met today foresaw drone warfare, a bit like if you read H.G. Wells, who foresaw modern warfare before Guernica, etc. He was writing after the First World War about what a future war might look like with aerial bombardment and so on, and very actually extraordinary foresight. And he foresaw tank warfare prior to the First World War. Well, This person similarly was able to describe in detail what this is going to be like, but also describe the societal mobilization that you need to sustain such warfare. She was talking about the role of civic society, the role of entrepreneurs, very rapid turnaround iteration, the integration of civilians into the military structure to actually allow these processes to happen. This is very poorly still understood, I think, in the West and even in Western militaries. To what extent Ukraine's victory and to what extent the drone war that is holding Russia at bay is down to the input of civilians who've become militarized, not down to central government and its competence. This is very poorly understood. But she's now talking about the next war. And this is interesting. She says drones. Everyone thinks the next war is going to be like drones on steroids and autonomous drones. No, she says we need to think beyond that. Drones are just a phase that is holding the Russians at bay. The next phase of the war is cognitive. It's in people's minds. And we're already seeing the outline of that conflict. So everything we're talking about here, the dissolution of consensus and traditional politics, the extremism, the use of social media, the weaponization of narratives, she says we need to gear up because this is going to be exponentially worse even than it is now. So when we talk about, a liberal recovery, a recovery of consensus, we're not going to do it in calm waters. We're going to have to achieve this in a raging gale with, massive waves slopping all around us.
But it only reminds that everything is a wave, and this too shall pass. And as I say at the end of every newscast that I read, that Igor Eisenberg writes, we do a countdown of how many days left, and right now I believe there's 1,150 days that are left until this the Trump nightmare is over. So we're, and so thanks to you, thanks to all of our viewers and listeners. I see that people are saying that they're freezing their butts off in the UK and Copenhagen. Thank you to everyone there. And Spain, even, I don't know how people can be cold in Spain, but all right. Oh, sitting, at least they're cold on the beach, at the beach. All right, then I guess that explains it. Jonathan, thanks to you. Be safe. Take care, everyone.
Thanks to everyone. Cheers, Yuri.
Cheers.